Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 4th of October and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and today I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh while our studios in Cowcaddens are upgraded. First we will have a look at today's coronavirus update, then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then we will look at the stories behind today's news headlines together. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 3,215,886 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,640,656 have been confirmed negative, and 575,230 have tested positive. There are 1,760 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. Now you can see from the graphic that's on the screen now that the rolling 14-day average of new COVID cases in Scotland is now at its lowest level since the 2nd of July this year, and that feels like an important milestone. There are no new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 8,666. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,001 were in hospital last night, 66 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,217,940 people had received their first dose of the COVID vaccination, and 3,847,118 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 136,986 patients who tested positive for COVID have sadly died from their illness, and that is an increase of 33 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just in hospitals. Now we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by a regular guest, Edinburgh's answer to John Coltrane, Peter Curran. Peter worked for a number of large businesses in Scotland, in particular in connection with human resources. Now that he has earned his retirement, he's a noted writer, blogger and commentator. Peter, thank you for joining us this evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. By the way, the saxophone comparison, people that know me have heard me would compare me to Charlie Caroli, the clown in Bertram Mills Circus, or a lost guy called Rudy Vidoff.
I'll take your word for it, Peter. I'll take your word for it, Peter. Thank you. Now, our first story this evening is that a major Conservative Party donor who funded Boris Johnson's campaign to become Prime Minister advised on the structure of a deal that was later found to be a $220 million bribe for the daughter of the then President of Uzbekistan. Documents show how Mohamed Amersi advised a Swedish multinational telecoms company on a complex transaction that it later accepted was a corrupt payment to the powerful first daughter of Uzbekistan's authoritarian ruler, Islam Karimov. Responding to the allegations, Amersi's lawyer said any suggestion he knowingly facilitated corrupt payments was false, and that the underlying arrangements for the deal had been put in place 2 years before. Following the leaks, Boris Johnson has come under pressure to return the £750,000 donated to the Conservatives by Mohamed Amersi. Tony Blair, the Czech Prime Minister, the King of Jordan, and the chairman of India's biggest conglomerate were among global figures denying wrongdoing today after the leak of what major news outlets called a secret trove of documents about offshore finance. The Kremlin said it had seen no evidence in the leak of hidden wealth among Russian President Vladimir Putin's entourage, after the Washington Post said the documents showed that Putin's mistress had used offshore funds to buy a flat in Monaco. The Conservative peer Lord Dayton, the government's PPE tsar at the height of the pandemic, did not declare secret offshore investments that also appear in the Pandora Papers leak. A former commercial secretary to the Treasury and then chief executive of the London Organising Committee of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, LOCOG, Dayton had declared his investments were all in a blind trust. However, the offshore leak reveals how Dayton and his wife Alison invested in a series of undeclared startup companies via a British Virgin Islands-based funds management managed by the venture capital group Dawn Capital. The couple's shareholdings included 1 stake acquired directly by Dayton and 4 by his wife in 5 startup companies between 2011 and 2013. One investment the Daytons had previously kept hidden from the public was Lady Dayton's holding in the controversial former payday loan company Wonga. The dump of more than 11.9 million records, amounting to about 2.94 terabytes of data, comes 5 years after the leak known as the Panama Papers, which exposed how money was hidden, and this leak exposes how money has been hidden by 14 advisory companies for the wealthy, in ways that law enforcement agencies struggle to detect. So, Peter, first of all, Mercy is a Conservative Party donor. He donated £10,000 each to Boris Johnson and to Michael Gove during the 2019 Conservative Party leadership election. Does that suggest to you that he likes a canny flutter with the bookies?
Well, what can we say? I mean, they called this the Pandora, the famous analogy with Pandora's box, which was unwisely opened and let out this host of things. I don't think anybody in the big money field is going to be much bothered by that. They'll just give it a quick squish of insecticide and it will fall down and the story will pass. I mean, the first rule of donors for a political party is never give back any money that's donated. I mean, the Liberal Party demonstrated that not so long ago, well, it's a few years ago now in reality, when they accepted a donation from a convicted criminal who had made his money by crime and declined flatly to give it back. But they had a good excuse. They'd already spent the money. So what can we say about this? This is the lifeblood of the Conservative Party, dirty money. It's also, I have to say, the lifeblood in a lower scale, perhaps, of many political parties. And nobody's free from this. Nobody's free from the lure of money. If I could give an anecdote from my own experience, I'm safely distancing myself here from being carted away for defamation or libel, whatever the case may be. But I've worked in consulting with many very large blue chip companies, international companies. And I remember working with one in Strathclyde Business School. And the question of bribery came up in the context of something in the news. And this was a group of very senior management of this company. And I said, well, in mentioning this in passing, I just want to emphasize that I would never believe a company like yours would resort to bribery in their worldwide operations. And all these senior managers nodded vigorously in agreement. So we would never bribe anyone. And then one of them said, we do it through agents. And the rest fell about laughing at the truth of the statement. The fact is, a large part of the world's commerce is oiled on bribery. Politics is rife with it. Now, there's only one answer to bribery. It's the same answer to gross neglect of safety studies in industry and young apprentices being scalded alive or having their legs taken off by the negligence of a firm. And what do? They fine the firm. They fine the firm. If it's a small firm, fining the firm makes it harder for them to maintain any form of safety practice because they're hard up. If they fine the large company, it's a blip on their accounts, which can happily be written off in one way or another. There's only one way to kill this sort of thing, and that is to prosecute under the criminal law the people who are involved in that at both ends of the transaction. But politics being what it is, I see little chance of any of this happening. I'm delighted that this organisation of journalists is doing such sterling work. And as you say, you quoted some of the statistics, Andrew, it's a massive operation in terms of the millions, tens of millions of data items accumulated. And I think something like 650 separate reporters have been involved in this. So nobody can challenge the veracity of this sort of thing, but they'll swat it away like a fly, and they're already doing it. And organs, fearless, free organs of telling the truth to power, like the Spectator, the Telegraph, the Daily Express, will already have been polishing their apples to explain away why, well, this is not really what it seems like. So forgive me for being in a mood of deep skepticism, drifting almost into cynicism. It's horrifying. It's delightful that it's been revealed.
It's your feelings are perfectly understandable, I think, Peter. Mohammed Amersi said about his £750,000 donation that the Conservative Party was operating an access capitalism scheme for major Tory donors like himself. He said, you get access, you get invitations, you get privileged relationships if you are part of the setup. So does this tell us that the Westminster setup includes paying handsomely for access and for privileges?
Yeah, well, not only the Westminster setup, one of the things that amused me most about this was the fact that Vladimir Putin has a mistress. Now, clearly, he's selected a mistress who has appalling taste in men and even worse judgment. But you see, that's what money buys. And it buys all the things you've said. Again, quoting from my consultancy career, the way money can be channeled to places that the public don't know it's going and influence decision making, there's multiple ways of doing it. I mean, all these senior politicians, and I name a few notable Scots, well, there's a programme on about them tonight, the first of 5, who managed to swan around the world making mega bucks, essentially peddling their contacts. I mean, nobody's paying them that kind of money to listen to their anecdotes about government. Nobody's paying that for specific services that they're offering. People like Blair, Mandelson, Brown, etc., didn't get filthy rich by having massive innate talents, either as a lawyer, or whatever Mandelson was originally, and as a son of the man's like Gordon Brown. These people are peddling influence. Anyway, you slice it. Now, they may say they've got a perfect right to do that, and I'm sure they made it as safe as they can to say that all of this stuff is legal. But when you get that kind of money, you become close to being untouchable. So I don't know. I mean, no amount of regulation is going to stop this. The only thing that would ever stop it is a great cry of outrage from the electorates of the countries that these people are part of. And I think perhaps in some of the people that have been named in this were close to election time. They may have cause to worry about this. This may affect an election. But unfortunately, these scandals tend to come about when we're safely distanced from an election. And there's plenty of time to do a snow job, get the whitewash out and paint it over it all. So,
Yes.
But Vladimir Putin having a mistress is frankly, Vladimir, incredible.
It struck me as well in the reporting of Mohammed Amersi in particular, that the work he was doing for the Swedish telecoms company Telia, very involved in part, substantial amounts of money being spent at his discretion on what was described as hospitality, something like $200,000 a month. Was being spent on what was described as lavish hospitality. So we've got somebody here who's prepared to spend £750,000 on the Conservative Party and is spending hundreds of thousands of pounds a month on hospitality in the context of contracts in Uzbekistan and across Central Asia. Do you think there's a consistent behaviour there in terms of the way in which Mr. Amersi doles out largesse and what he expects to receive in return for it?
Oh, absolutely. What I don't think is that what Mr. Amersi is doing is all that unusual. I mean, I think this is the way that top-level politics, commerce, influence operates. I mean, there's a whole industry called public relations, or sometimes they don't like to call themselves that these days. I mean, in my days as a manager, I had a modest budget for entertaining certain people who could facilitate my objectives. My objectives were wholly legal and wholly honourable. But I've had to endure the unendurable misery for me of spending days at the open golf course, open golf competition when it was in Scotland, but boring the arse off me. I mean, watching spectator sport doesn't interest me, but watching golf for me is like having my eyeballs torn out of my head. And this was to keep full-time officials of unions happy. Now, we didn't say to them, if you do this, please give us a deal. But, they felt a certain sense of obligation as they sat there in the celebrity box next to this Cretan-faced Glaswegian who hated the sight of a golf club and a golf ball. But there you are. It's the way the world works. I wish the hell it wasn't, but...
Absolutely, Peter. And we'll come back to discussing both public relations and bribery later on in the programme. But for now, we'll move on to our second story. Decarbonising transport, including rail services, offers a significant opportunity to contribute to reducing the threat of climate change, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has said. Speaking at the formal launch of the £120 million Glasgow Queen Street station today, the First Minister applauded the substantial investment of over £9 billion in rail infrastructure since 2007 that sees over 75% of all rail passenger journeys in Scotland now made by electric services. She also announced key progress on the continuation of rail decarbonisation, with confirmation that the £63 million Barhead Line electrification will now move to the construction phase. This is the latest milestone in the delivery of Transport Scotland's Rail Decarbonisation Action Plan, launched last year, which will see the removal of all diesel and passenger services by 2035. The First Minister said, with just a month until world leaders arrive in Glasgow to address the growing climate crisis, Scotland's railway is well on track in its journey towards full decarbonisation of passenger services. This new Glasgow Queen Street, delivered as part of the Edinburgh-Glasgow Improvement Programme, is a shining example of how we can modernise historic and iconic stations, offering greener transport hubs that are more attractive to commuter, business and leisure markets alike. This station led the city through industrialisation, and it now stands out as an example of what we can achieve as we navigate our way towards net zero. So, Peter, this is the latest milestone in the delivery of Transport Scotland's Rail Decarbonisation Action Plan, which was launched last year, and it's intended to see the removal of all diesel on passenger rail services by 2035. Now, I appreciate that's 5 years ahead of the equivalent Westminster target, but it's 14 years away really quick enough.
Well, we're back to this vexed question of objective setting and targeting and measurement. It seems a truism to say, if you're going to set an objective in something, you have to make it measurable. You have to say, here's what we will have to achieve in hard numbers. And hard numbers don't necessarily measure things, money. They measure qualitative benefits, which is quite a difficult thing, but it's a vital element in any measurement of a target. The classic mantra on targets are they should be ambitious but realistic. Now, targets should be driven by the problem that the objective is designed to solve. So if you say, for example, as Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on the moon, or a person on the moon, it was a man in effect, by 1969, you've got to say, can we reasonably set anything to achieve that objective? The danger is that unless you can marshal massive resource and take the cost of marshalling massive resource, because resources cost money, you are driven by the wish to make a promise, but is it realistic? If it's not realistic, of course, you're saying giving up and saying, well, we can't do anything about this because we can't afford it. So it's a very difficult judgment to make. The Scottish government's constantly being beaten up on missing targets, and all parties do this to the other party. You promised this, you promised that, and you didn't deliver. Targeting's a complex business, and it involves setting milestones along the road, benchmarks to the targets, and crucially, not setting targets which are dismissed and demoralised as utterly unachievable. I think the Scottish Government is doing a pretty reasonable job on this kind of thing. But when is enough enough? I don't know. I think it's a great pity that the Scottish Government sometimes is not effective at publicising all these positive things it's doing, which seem to be below the radar of the press and certainly below the radar of the average voter, and occasionally below my radar. If it wasn't for broadcasting, Scotland highlighting these things, I don't know if we know about them. So I commend it, and I think it's significant. It matters. It matters vitally. It's something we can, insofar as we've got any role in the COP conference, say this is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to do. And I hope the green influence in that is significant. By the way, I did put a tweet up about this. When they published the full detail of the Green Deal, the most revealing part of it, which I think SNP might not have wanted to be so revealing, was the list of reserved topics which the Greens were, the Scottish Government was not obliged to operate in a kind of quasi-cabinet responsibility with the Greens. And it shed an illuminating and rather uncomfortable light on where their views of the Greens were. In other words, it's almost saying the Greens can call for the moon because they're not in power in any real sense other than the leverage power of the government majority. But the Greens might call for unrealistic things, and the Scottish Government has to balance that by practical looks at the impact of doing it, and that's most notable in fossil fuels. So that's just an aside. But these things, that's what semi-coalition or working arrangements in governments is always about. It's about adjusting relative perceptions of priorities and objectives. So we shouldn't get sniffy and negative about it, as I'm guilty of doing on occasion.
Absolutely, Peter. Thank you. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that Rishi Sunak has signalled that any further spending pledges will need to be funded by tax rises rather than borrowing, as he told the Conservative Party that it should not trash its reputation for fiscal responsibility. Despite hopes from many new Conservative backbenchers for cash injections in their more deprived constituencies, the Chancellor laid down a marker and said it would be unconservative to pursue reckless borrowing or allow debt to soar. Sunak's first party conference speech as a cabinet minister was hotly anticipated, given that among Tory members he is one of the most popular politicians, tipped as a future leader, and will fuel speculation he is preparing a run for the top job. Responding to Chancellor Sunak's speech at the Tory party conference, the SNP Shadow Chancellor Alison Thulis MP said, "Rishi Sunak's speech failed on every level. It was loaded with soundbites, but empty on substance to tackle the Tory-made cost of living crisis facing households across the UK. There was nothing to address the significant number of households being plunged into poverty due to the impending cut to universal credit, nothing on the impact of the premature move to scrap the furlough scheme, nothing on the impact of regressive Tory tax hikes, nothing to rule out another decade of Tory austerity, and nothing on the meaningful investment needed to secure a strong and fair recovery from the pandemic. His move to strip away £6 billion of support through the universal credit uplift straight from the pockets of some of the lowest income families across the UK and attempt to cover it up with a £1 billion announced so far is a classic Tory con trick. The grim reality is that this deliberate political choice will push struggling people over the brink. The UK already has the worst levels of poverty and inequality in Northwest Europe, and under Boris Johnson, in-work poverty has risen to record levels this century. And with Brexit playing a major role in the staff shortages, empty supermarket shelves, soaring costs and the ongoing fuel crisis, things are set to get worse. So Peter, first of all, were you impressed today by Rishi Sunak's bait and switch over support for the poorest families, taking £6 billion away and handing over about £1 billion back?
No, Andrew, I wasn't impressed. But can I say I was infinitely relieved that he didn't shimmy on stage to the Dancing Queen like Michael Gove did. I mean, I don't know what his chosen tune would be. Maybe it would have been some sort of abortion of Baker Street, winding my way down in the street. You know, can imagine. I met a woman in the supermarket who said, "Oh, you do all that politics stuff, don't you, Peter?" And I said, "Well, I try and comment occasionally." She said, "Well, I'd never ever vote Tory. I hate the Tories. But I like that wee Rishi. Rishi, what's his name? He's got a nice face, a nice wee man, isn't he?" And I said, "No, he's a multi-millionaire. His net worth is estimated at £200 million by some estimates. How anybody, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, can in any way place himself in the shoes of the ordinary person or realise what the impact of £20 a week can mean to a family on the breadline, that kind of wealth does not encourage you to look objectively at these things and say, I know from my own experience." So not impressed at all. What is he doing? Well, yes, he's right. The Tory party was worried about this conference because they're doing things that are classically unconservative or un-Tory. They're denying the basic rationale of the existence of the Tory party, which is to make money for themselves, for politicians, and persuade the mass of the unwashed that they're operating in their interest when they're actually draining the blood from them by the day and making them pay for the mistakes of the powerful. So that's what they're doing. I mean, this Tory party conference, it's typical. I mean, in no way is this a dialogue with the people or even with the delegates or the Tory supporters. This is in the old model of the highly managed conference. It's not there to have debate or intelligent discussion about events. They might be buried away somewhere in a fringe meeting. It's for people to play to their celebrity and try and calm things down. Not particularly for the delegates, although the delegates matter. They can, at the end of the day, go back into their constituency parties and perhaps unseat a Tory MP or at least not reselect them at the next election. The Tory party conference, like all party conference, is partly about calming the faithful, but it's also about reaching around out to the uninformed and trying to do a quick PR job on them, to focus on the celebrity and the jokes and the sound bites. I mean, it's quite appalling. But the Tory party, the incredible thing about the virus and COVID is the Tory party was forced into rationality and almost a semblance of virtue by the sheer immediacy of the demand of COVID, which they're not being by climate change or any other things that involve imagination beyond the day. But when they saw their prime minister catching the bug and they saw one of their key civil servants scampering in an undignified manner back to hide in a farmhouse in Durham, apart from an occasional jaunt to Barnard Castle, and they realised they had to do something. And they borrowed massively, which again is a difficult thing. And now it's a question of who pays the piper, who calls the tune for that. And the Tory maxim is anybody but us. Anybody but people that run the party, anybody. And what we've got far more of the unwashed who just have to be squeezed that bit harder till the pips squeak. But it mustn't touch our big business interests, our donors, the people that funnel money to us. The Tory party, in all its core philosophy, is fundamentally a giant immorality.
Absolutely, Peter. And we're going to come on, we'll look at that a little bit further with our next story. And that is that 1/3 of households in Scotland receiving universal credit will have their income slashed by 20% when the UK government cut goes ahead on Wednesday, according to new Scottish government figures. The average household reduction will be 12%, and some households will see the amount of universal credit they are entitled to reduce to nil. Around 480,000 people in Scotland will have their support cut by plans to cut universal credit by £20 a week. The number of households in Scotland affected by the benefit cap has also increased from 6,100 to 6,800, with the average amount capped per month equalling £218. Commenting, the SNP MSP and convener of the Social Security Committee, Neil Gray, said that these numbers demonstrate the devastating impact the plans to cut universal credit will have on thousands of families across Scotland who are due to have their income slashed with one stroke of the Chancellor's pen. Mr. Gray said the decision to cut universal credit is morally indefensible. It is going to push thousands of people into poverty. It is going to leave many parents unable to feed their children. In just days, thousands of families will face an incredible squeeze on their incomes. Coupled with rising energy prices and food bills and imminent national insurance hike, many low-income families will have to make the unthinkable decision of whether to heat their homes or feed their children, he added. So, Peter, according to the recent Joseph Rowntree Foundation report, since the UK government controls 85% of social spending in Scotland and is completely responsible for working age benefits, the overall inadequacy in social security falls at the UK government's door. So when it doesn't have the powers to print the money that it needs, why should the Scottish government work to mitigate the effects of Westminster Tory dogma on the poorest in our societies?
Good question, and I don't think anybody has any easy answers to that. I think it's a question of looking hard at the whole range of their budgets and saying, what can we cut? I mean, anybody who's worked in industry over decades, as I have and as you have, Andrew, I believe, although I don't know your full employment history, but I'm sure you've been in industry or commerce and experienced these same pressures. When push comes to shove and budgets must be cut, there are always things there that can be culled. And the key criterion I used in budgets that I control, which are never large, human resource people tend not to command large budgets, but they are influential on how large budgets are handled by the very nature of the human resource role. We'll take an example, training budgets. I mean, training in many companies is used as a kind of sump for costs that you want to incur, which nobody would permit you to incur, and you squirrel it away under the training budget. So the famous one there is away days. Companies, politicians are very fond and grew fonder and fonder right throughout the 80s and 90s of the concept of the away day. The away day was supposed to take the managers away from the stress and the huddly-buddly of the day-to-day decision-making and allow them to relax in a quiet context and talk about these things. In point of fact, it was very often a rationale for a junket. I've gone to some away days which lasted 3 days, and the business was done in the first 2 hours of the first day. The rest of the day was spent in various forms of relaxation, which I won't go into in any detail. So there's always things that can be cut. And there's things I coined with some colleagues of mine in Scottish and Newcastle many years ago, a form of prioritization. We were using the old 1, 2, 3. What can we cut? What can we safely cut in budget? That's number one, that's number two, number three. And we realized that it wasn't as simple as that. And we come up with a concept called, a colleague of mine, Jerry Dwyer, crucial, important, desirable. So crucial were objectives or budgets that you absolutely could not cut. They might not be big in themselves, but they were absolutely vital to something happening, and they were sacrosanct. The next to that became important, which is the bulk of things which are measured in scale. And you could cut them, and sometimes you could cut them pretty close to the bone without administering a lethal blow. And at the bottom end were the desirable things. It would be really nice to have these things and to spend money on them, but we can't. So you started with the desirable, and then you worked your way up to the lower level of importance, and then finally you came to face with the crucials, big crucials, small crucials, immediately demanding crucials, crucials further down the line. The big temptation there was to deal with the immediate and try and keep your eye off the long ball. But keeping your eye on the long ball in any form of management, budgeting, long-term plans is the vital thing. And we used to call it, remember the reality of the future. But reality presses on you daily, and it's easy to justify reacting to it. Like the pandemic, but the reality of climate change, until your house is being blown away, submerged in a tidal wave or you're being burnt out, the reality is not yet coming close. It's coming dangerously close now. So that's the difficulty.
Thanks, Peter. Our next story is that a Metropolitan Police officer who is accused of raping a woman he met on the dating app Tinder has been remanded in custody. PC David Carrick, who serves in the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, was arrested at the weekend after being accused of attacking the woman after they met for drinks in St Albans last year, a court heard. Carrick, who denies the allegation, is suspended from duty and is due to appear at St Albans Crown Court on the 1st of November. He appeared at St Albans Magistrates Court via video link from a police station in Stevenage and spoke only to confirm his name and date of birth. Mark Fleckney, prosecuting, said Carrick was alleged to have met the woman on the 4th of September last year and they went for drinks in St Albans. It is alleged Carrick told the woman he was a Met Police officer who guarded a number of important people, including the Prime Minister. The court heard that he is alleged to have raped the woman at the Premier Inn in St Albans, where he was staying. Ryan Dowding, defending, said the officer emphatically denied the allegation. The Chief Magistrate, Paul Goldspring, remanded Carrick in custody. Now, Peter, the woman in this latest case of David Carrick is said to have come forward to police after widespread media reports of the case of Constable Wayne Cousins, the Met PC who raped and murdered Sarah Everard. And I was wondering, is this not the nub of the issue here? The woman did not feel able to come forward and report the alleged attack by Carrick until Cousins was sentenced, perhaps either because she knew that Carrick was a cop or that she knew that the chances of getting justice were close to zero. And so is that the issue that we should be driving at in our responses as a society to the issues that both of these cases have raised?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It comes down to what's often called, and it's not confined to the police, canteen culture, the kind of thing that's tolerable. And if you've worked a long time in and with large organizations, you know how powerful and how difficult that is. I mean, again, if I go back to my human resource experience, these problems, one way or another, often landed on the human resource desk. And you would say to yourself, why in God's name has this not been challenged before? But what you're dealing with is often good people with a sound morality, a sound concept of equity and justice. But when they're dealing with their colleagues, they are reluctant to confront something that they know is wrong. I mean, the difficulty doesn't lie, I think, primarily with the people who are doing the wrong things, who are innately sexist and vigorously defending thoroughly objectionable behaviour. It lies with the good people who are protecting these people. That's the thing. Now, what do companies do when, or big organisations do when they try to get around this? They instinctively reach for an external consultant. And they will have no shortage of external consultants who will come in and charge them mega bucks for a series of solutions. I'm not saying within that mix of consultants there aren't people that have real expertise to offer, or I would be denying my own, whatever it was, 15 years in consultancy. But these things have to start with a direct dialogue within the organisation between the superior and each individual person. Let me give you an example of it. A close friend of mine, I count him as a close friend in the independence movement, once said to me, what do you do if you're at a dinner party and you're having a convivial time and your partner or your wife is with you or your husband, or as the case may be, and suddenly somebody comes out and says something outrageously politically loaded, which fundamentally challenges your basic feelings of right, justice, and equity. Do you wreck the party by coming out and challenging it frontally, to be hauled out by your wife or your partner for saying, my God, what did you do that? You wrecked a good evening. Or do you remain silent? Now, my recommendation in this point is the one I frankly have used myself. Is if it's really bad, say, I just want to say in that point, in fundamental disagreement with your last statement, but I do not think this is the place to introduce that kind of debate. But somehow or other, it has to be confronted. If it can't be confronted on the spot in the canteen culture around the table or wherever in the canteen queue, then you have to call that person aside and say, look, as a friend and colleague, I was a bit shocked at your statement. I don't share that view. You really should think hard about that because sooner or later it's going to come back and bite you. So it's that kind of organic thing by the good people. The people who are locked in
Absolutely.
these racist attitudes and these bitterness and sexist attitudes, they're a much more difficult problem to change. The people that can be changed are the people that are condoning it, and they're the real villains.
Yes, yes, absolutely, Peter. Thank you. We'll return now to issues of bribery and payments to the Conservative Party, because Petrofac Limited has been ordered to pay £77 million after the Serious Fraud Office secured further convictions in its investigation into bribery and corruption at the Jersey-registered energy services company. On Friday, Petrofac Limited pleaded guilty to 7 separate counts of failing to prevent bribery between 2011 and 2017. Petrofac Limited admitted that it failed to prevent former senior executives of the Petrofac Group from paying about £32 million in bribes to help the Petrofac Group win over £2.6 billion of contracts in the oil and gas industry in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The court heard how, over a period of 6 years, senior executives within the Petrofac Group engaged in elaborate schemes to corrupt the awarding of contracts, using agents to systematically bribe officials to win lucrative contracts by unfair and dishonest means. A key feature of the case was the complex and deliberately opaque methods used by these senior executives to pay agents across borders, disguising payments through subcontractors, creating fake contracts for fictitious services, and in some cases, passing bribes through more than one agent in one country to disguise their actions. Petrofac was headed by Ayman Asfari during those years. He and his wife have donated almost £800,000 to the Conservative Party in a personal capacity. Official documents have detailed how David Cameron, after he stepped down as Prime Minister, and Theresa May while she was still in Downing Street, had lobbied the Bahraini royal family to give Petrofac a contract. Another Conservative minister, Liam Fox, had also lobbied for the firm after it was announced in 2017 that it was being investigated by the Serious Fraud Office for bribery and money laundering. David Lufkin was the only senior Petrofac executive who admitted being involved in the bribery. The 54-year-old former global head of sales pleaded guilty to 14 counts of bribery to win contracts worth £5.5 billion in the 3 Middle Eastern countries between 2012 and 2018. The judge accepted that he had cooperated with the SFO and supplied important information to prosecutors. This included evidence that Petrofac had paid bribes in 12 unidentified countries to win contracts. Lufkin was given a 2-year jail sentence, which was suspended. So, Peter, given the scale of the bribery that the SFO have managed to obtain a conviction for in this case, thinking of David Lufkin, the global head of sales, is a 2-year suspended sentence an appropriate sentence in this case, or does that send the wrong message to people who might be tempted to engage in bribery?
I don't want to comment on the specific case. In the face of what you say, my answer would be, it's not an adequate penalty or not. On the general point, I would simply say, going back to something I said earlier about penalising companies with money. Ultimately, since the whole thing is about money at the start, and money on a scale that is very difficult for the average person to comprehend the degree to which massive sums of money can leverage almost any wish on the planet. So it was rather like the banking crisis. I mean, I don't think any banker in Britain went to jail, but certainly bankers in America did, but not enough of them, and not for long enough. I mean, unless these people know that they personally are at risk and they can't simply call on a sump fund, then it will not have the impact. I've been involved in discussions with companies in various ways, at a low level, at a higher level, board level, operating board level, and in consulting, when key decisions were made. And the sheer cynicism at times of the way they committed to money was astonishing. There was a film with Gene Hackman some years ago called Class Action. Wonderful film. And it was about the Ford Pinto, a car that Ford produced. And it had a mass market car. And on release, it demonstrated a rather disconcerting thing. I think it was if you were turning right and signaling right at a certain point, the car exploded. Not a desirable outcome. But the company, knowing this, had engaged what they called the bean counters, the people who assess the cost of avoiding risk. And every cost is avoided. I mean, they talk about planes avoiding the risk of explosion with high octane jet fuel, etc. And yet they allow you to carry a couple of litres of inflammable alcohol in the compartment above your head. So people balance out risk and that. And the risk is always measured in money. If the risk was measured, you, as the decision maker at the highest level, are risking your liberty and the wreckage of your family life and career if you make decisions that are judged to be immoral and illegal. So it must come back to that. It's rather like serious acts that kill people. Until companies are prosecuted for corporate manslaughter, not fined, but the board members who were responsible for that decision, either actively or by abdication of the responsibility, unless they are pinned with it, things won't change.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. A Facebook whistleblower has accused the social media giant of repeatedly prioritizing profit over clamping down on hate speech and misinformation, and said her lawyers have filed at least 8 complaints with the US Securities and Exchange Commission. Frances Haugen, who worked as a product manager on the civic misinformation team at Facebook, appeared on the CBS television program 60 Minutes on Sunday, revealing her identity as the whistleblower, who provided the documents that underpinned a Wall Street Journal investigation and a Senate hearing on Instagram's harm to teen girls. Facebook has been under fire after the Journal published a series of stories based on Facebook internal presentations and emails that showed the social media company contributed to the increased polarization online when it made changes to its content algorithm, failed to take steps to reduce vaccine hesitancy, and was aware that Instagram harms the mental health of teenage girls. Haugen will testify before a Senate subcommittee on Tuesday in a hearing titled Protecting Kids Online, about the company's research into Instagram's effect on young users. Haugen, who previously worked at Google and Pinterest, said Facebook has lied to the public about the progress it made to clamp down on hate speech and misinformation on its platform. She added that Facebook was used to help organize the Capitol riot on January 6, after the company turned off safety systems following the US presidential elections. While she believed no one at Facebook was malevolent, she said the company had misaligned incentives. So, Peter, given the multiple issues which the Facebook organization is facing, contributing to the polarization online when it made changes to its algorithms, failing to take steps to reduce vaccine hesitancy, and it's been aware for some time that Instagram harms the mental health of teenage girls, do you think Facebook should now be broken up under antitrust legislation in the US, like phone companies and oil companies have been in the past?
Well, yes, I wouldn't confine that to Facebook. But I'll just say a piece of news early today. I suddenly saw it on us flashing up on a strapline. WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram have been shut down by whatever these outages were. And my first response was, hooray. Who is going to be sorry? Who is going to be hurt by that? It was Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So you know your point's absolutely right, Peter.
Yeah. Oh, they're still not working. I thought it had recovered. Well, interesting. So I was delighted with that. I mean, much of the problems, if not all of the problems of the world, are created by organizations which have grown too big for democracy. There's no other word for it. I mean, some
Absolutely.
companies, international corporations, have a budget equivalent, it used to be equivalent to a small country. They're now becoming equivalent to a medium-sized country. With that leverage, you can corrupt almost anything. I mean, America has shown again and again, and it's not just in wild dramatizations and police series, that if you have enough money in America, you can have somebody killed. I mean, the program Godfather 1, Al Pacino was explaining to his girlfriend of the moment, the nightmare man Luca Brasi, who was the enforcer for the Godfather. And he said he kills people. And the woman was horrified at this. And he said, yeah, so do senators. You know, if you have enough money in any state in the world, you'll find somebody who can be compelled to do your dirty work for you, either because of the money or because of a threat to those nearest and dearest to you. There's no limit to what these people will do. It's a question of sortness by whatever means. So yes, I think we have to look at all that. People talk about economies of scale. What they never seem to look at is the moral, ethical, democratic diseconomies of scale. Again, I say endlessly, but I'll repeat it again, it goes back to Eisenhower's military-industrial complex.
Yes.
You allow people, by creating corporate bodies, you allow them to evade corporate responsibility. As for Facebook, go back to an earlier thing I said, the real remedy of Facebook is to stop people using it. I mean, I'm a non-person because I think probably have a dormant Facebook account somewhere, but I could not square my conscience with it. When I say to people, and I include a lot of friends who I like and respect, saying, well, yeah, I use it, and you're a bit of a hypocrite, Peter, you use Amazon regularly. And I won't go into my defense of why I use Amazon and the whole aspect of that. But these government has to have the capacity to regulate the corporate economy. The corporate economy must be denied the opportunity to bend governments to its will. And it's very much a question of size and money.
Of course. Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. And our final story this evening is that families of more than 79,000 children are saving almost £5,000 per child annually, thanks to the Scottish Government's expanded early learning and childcare offer. Since August, all 3 and 4-year-olds and 2-year-olds who need it most have been eligible for 1,140 hours of funded early learning and childcare. Latest figures from the Improvement Service show that 90,890 children were accessing free early learning and childcare at the end of August 2021. Of those, 97% of children were accessing more than 600 hours and 87% were accessing the full 1,140 hours offer. All eligible families who applied had been offered the full 1,140 hours. The Children's Minister Claire Hockey said, "This week marks Challenge Poverty Week, and we know that childcare costs can place a real burden on families. So it is encouraging to see that thousands of families across the country are benefiting from our transformational expanded early learning and childcare offer." So Peter, is the delivery of this expansion against the very challenging backdrop of the pandemic, do you think it's a testament to the hard work of councils and the Scottish Government and those and the other organisations involved in expanding and delivering early learning and childcare in Scotland?
Yes, it is, and it's welcome, and I commend it. I think we also have to look at some very hard facts in international league tables of where Scotland stands in relation to child poverty and the state of children, and realise that even when you've taken into account all the historical factors, all the pressures, negative pressures of being in the union and all the rest of it, there are aspects of our record, like our record in drugs, which do not bear the closest examination. But we're doing something about it. We've got good people who are doing their level best, and I can only welcome and commend these initiatives. I mean, there's no greater crime in this world than to crush the hopes, the health, even the lives of children. it should be regarded as absolutely intolerable. And if we go back to my crucial, important, desirable categorization of what's important and what isn't, the crucial of crucials right up there should be the welfare of Scotland's children. And we shouldn't be at the bottom of league tables or even in the middle of league tables. We should be up there and as exemplar of the best, the most humane, caring and intelligent dealing with our children. Anybody who has children in their extended family, as I have, knows how you're utterly crushed when you hear of something happening to a child, anybody's child.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. And that was our final news item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, culture and current affairs. If you would like to support us, and we would really like you to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work on Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in then. Thanks to you all for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland, and a very big thank you indeed to Peter Curran for joining us this evening.
Thanks for inviting me. Have we actually finished
you,
within time tonight?
We're trying, Peter. So that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening.